You're listening to the University of Sioux Falls Campus Ministries podcast.
Hi everyone, my name's Matt Stiles and I serve as the campus pastor at the University of Sioux Falls. On this podcast, we have conversations with USF staff, alumni, students, and experts in the community to help us better integrate the Christian faith into our particular field. The topic that we're focusing on this semester is created for community. Today on the podcast, we welcome Brandon Johnson. Brandon serves as Associate Pastor of Student Ministries at Oak Hills Baptist Church in Sioux Falls. He brings around 2 decades of experience from a wide variety of contexts and cultures, including serving as a pastor in Nyon, Switzerland. He is passionate about students, families, and the local church. Brandon is a graduate of Howard Payne University in Texas with a Bachelor of Arts in Theology and Philosophy, and also from Logsdon Seminary in Texas with a Master's of Arts in Family Ministry. And so, Brandon, thanks for being a part of the podcast this morning.
Yeah, Matt, so glad to be here. So fun to be part of this conversation. Love what you're doing here.
Yeah, thanks. Brandon, we're talking this semester about the topic of being created for community, and we're talking about the importance of community and also sharing helpful insights about how to cultivate it. And so in your theological studies and in your pastoral experience, can you recall certain moments when you were struck by just how important community was for the Christian faith and for just us as followers of Jesus?
Yeah, that's such a good question. When I first read this question, when you gave it to me, I thought to myself, most of the work that we were doing when we lived in Europe had to do with third culture folks. And so people were living in these contexts, in these countries, these cities. They weren't from there. They didn't have the same passport as the host nation or anything like that. But their work brought them there, or they were refugees, asylum seekers. And so we were really trying to minister to those folks. And so the last place we were at in Nyon, it's just north of Geneva. And so I was walking around Geneva, this old city one day, and I was reflecting on how the buildings look a little bit different. And they look different because community, right? And so the history of the city, right, is 16th century, Reformation kind of takes off. John Calvin's there. And shortly thereafter, like really mid 16th century, kind of going into the 17th, there start to be all of these reformed refugees that are making their way to Geneva, because Geneva becomes like this Protestant version of Rome, right? And so here's Calvin, he's kind of leading this moment and this city, and they realize like old school Geneva is this old medieval city, right? It has big city walls, and so there's nowhere for them to grow out, but there's this influx of people coming to them. And so suddenly they have this people issue, they have a community issue, and the issue in their community is, what do we do for our brothers and sisters in this situation? We can't grow out, so what do we do? And so what they choose to do is they choose to grow up. And so they build on top of all of these buildings. They change the architecture all the way around. And so when you walk around Geneva, even today, especially the old medieval part of the city, like you can tell what they did to accommodate. By some people's estimates, a conservative estimate is that the city grew by 30%. Other people say, no, the city it closer than maybe doubled in size. And so they did all of this. And so I think when I'm thinking about this, and when you look at these buildings in Geneva and the way that even the physical architecture changed, then the question I'm always asking myself in this situation, or working with internationals, or working with people in Sioux Falls, is what am I doing and what can we do as God's people to accommodate others in our lives? And so I think something about that day in Geneva and just seeing like, here's a physical symbol of a city that opened up their arms and their very lives to brothers and sisters that needed them in the moment. And so what might that look like in the communities that we inhabit now. And so that continues to live in my imagination.
Yeah, that's a great image to help us see the communal nature of Scripture. And I think a lot of times in Western tradition, too, where we've individualized the faith so much, where we think, it's primarily me and God. And then as we dig into the Scriptures, the teachings of Jesus, we see that reconciliation with God leads us to reconciliation with one another, and it transforms whole communities and relationships. It's just a really cool image of that.
Absolutely. No, that's so true. Even thinking about how individualized we are, right? Like it just kind of builds up these walls, kind of like that old medieval city. And it's like, well, what do I do with that? And what do we do with that? And so it's this constant evaluation of, sometimes walls need to come down, and sometimes I need to just be really thoughtful about the space where I'm inviting people in, and then also the space where I'm willing to engage someone else's invitation, right? And so, I guess that could look a lot of different ways, right?
Yeah, the passage that comes to mind for me when I think of walls coming down too is Ephesians 2. Oh. And a lot of times that first half of the chapter gets emphasized. We're saved by grace through faith, and this not of ourselves and of our own work, so that we have nothing to boast about. And then after that first half, it goes into that second half, that he himself is our peace, who has made the two one and destroyed the dividing wall of hostility, and to make one new humanity out of the two. And that this vision of the gospel is that it would lead to this community where walls are coming down, lives are being built together, I think is such a beautiful image.
Absolutely. I even thinking about the Midwest, like this time of year, right? We're coming out of winter. This weekend's supposed to be like 80 degrees.
Yes, right.
So suddenly everyone has this hope that they may have lost in the last few months about just what life will be like in the sun again. But in the winter here in the Midwest, what I've learned is like I can leave my house before the sun comes up, and I open up my garage and I back out and I drive down the road and I go to work and I come back home and I open up my garage and I drive into my garage and I have zero interactions with my neighbors, right? And I may not see them for months.
Yeah.
And so part of the struggle, I think, that we must engage as people that live in places like this and people that live in the West is, what does it look like for me to break that rhythm, right?
Yeah. That's such a good question. And to think of how many things reinforce that, the opposite of that rhythm,
right?
Of being able to pull directly into our garage that attaches to our house, oftentimes decks moving to the backyard instead of the front yard. All sorts of ways where we can move around without engaging many people. Even shopping, we can have people just come and take it right to our car or deliver it right to our house.
Yeah.
And so there's an intentionality that needs to happen if we're to move into those rhythms.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's huge.
When you think about the intentional act of moving towards community, how has that impacted the way that you serve students and the way that you think about ministry?
Yeah, that's good too. A couple of different ways. So the first one is, I think that all of us come from, all the students that we engage, we always try to think of, there's a context that their life is happening in, right? So there's a community that's already involved, and some people are in a very highly relational community, right? They might be in a very intact biological family. Some students have maybe the opposite experience. They don't really have an intact, biological family, but they have some kind of relational context that they're coming with. And so whenever we meet with them and we're developing relationships, this idea of community, and we would use the word like kind of belonging, like we're trying to create a place of belonging because we feel like it's so integral to the ministry of Jesus and now the ministry of the church that we almost just want to instill, like, we do this thing together, right? We want to connect with one another as humans, but we want that to revolve around this good news message of Jesus and what God's doing in the world. And so it kind of becomes like quintessential, right? Because I think, now we're similar age, you and me, Matt. I wonder if the era that we grew up in, maybe we met a lot of people and they were really good intentioned people, like great saints, right? That probably encouraged us, like, have a quiet time, have some prayer with God, and then like just go do your life. And maybe we were attached to various youth groups and maybe various churches sometimes and sometimes not. But I don't know if someone kind of pointed out, like even what you've pointed out here today is like the importance of community. Like, yeah, you need to read your Bible, you need to pray. Those are, again, foundational, but alongside of those, you desperately need other people or the ship will sink.
Yes, right. Yeah, just that vision for it. I remember when I first encountered the importance of community was reading some Stan Grenz.
Oh, yeah.
And just being like, whoa, my mind was just blown open to see like, there are so many things that I just have not seen about why community is so important for a God who's 3 in 1, making us in his image. And then it's like all these connecting points that I was like, how did I overlook all this? And even seeing it in some of the curriculums that would come out for VBS or, different things. And I remember just being like, there's not much mention of the church or of community in that. It was a lot of God, us, and which is probably some of the intro stuff. But I was like, community really wasn't touched on a lot. And seeing the importance of that just kind of escalating over time as we can live more and more fragmented lives or have virtual community.
Totally. I think it's so interesting even hearing you kind of walk that out like that, is that if when we think of God in our imagination, if we don't have a triune God there, then when we go all the way downstream to ecclesiology, like we're going to lose that, right? But we lost it with our theology proper, like our theology of like, what is God like? If it's not triune and it's not the eternal community, then it definitely never gets translated down here to the church, right? And so we've lost it from the very first step.
Yes. It puts us on a different trajectory, and it's no wonder we end up missing the importance of it.
For sure.
I remember I mentioned that Ephesians 2 passage earlier, and I remember somebody talking about how they did a Bible study on Ephesians, and it was just, they were digging deeply into it again and again and again. And for whatever reason, they had missed out on that second part of Ephesians and the implications of what does this do for a community and the importance of it. And they were going back to it and started to see that. And they're like, how did I not see this all the times I intentionally studied it? But it kind of shows that trajectory led them to like overlook the importance of community.
For sure. Absolutely.
When we think about cultivating community, I know one of the things that you've talked about previously is the importance of being curious. Why do you think curiosity is so important, and how can that help us in the process of cultivating community?
Yeah. So curiosity, I don't know why it became kind of a thing for me, but it's definitely this I think I might be kind of curious by nature. But when I think of the students that we work with or just the culture that we inhabit, if we just accept the fact that we are very individualized and we live these lives where we kind of miss one another, at some point, someone has to break that rhythm, or it just is what it is, right? And so I think sometimes the most powerful thing that curiosity can do is it does break up the rhythm, because what it does is it allows me to engage another person on purpose and let them take the conversation where it might go. But what it requires of me is to give them all the control and also give them all the attention, all while I stop whatever it was that I was doing before. But if I can do those things, then it allows me to discover aspects about another person that I wouldn't have otherwise known. And it also, in terms of community building, the person that I'm engaging with suddenly feels heard. And so we ask students on a regular basis, when's the last time somebody listened to you? And so it's always one of those kind of, we're always asking, we'll ask students questions a lot of times and get them to write the answers. You don't got to sign it. Don't put your name on it. Like, we just want to know like what's actually happening. And you would be shocked how many times students would say something like, I don't know the answer to this question, which is just deeply troubling, right? And sad. And so I think curiosity becomes a little bit medicinal for that situation, right? Where if we can unleash our own curiosity and serve another person with it, I think that's at least part of the aspect of community. Community can grow out of that. And so we've just found that trying to encourage curiosity pushes against maybe some of the other places we might go in sharing space with other people.
When I think about that whole process of the importance of curiosity, but sometimes alternative approaches to it curiosity gives the power to the other person. But a lot of times we'll try to cultivate community by holding the power and exerting it onto others.
For sure.
And just thinking about, there can be well-intentioned people who are saying, I'm trying to build community, and might be wondering why in the world is it turning out the way it is. But part of it is we're holding on to that power rather than distributing it.
Totally. No, I think that's so right. And I also think like the way we think in the West is like if we build all of the structures properly, it will give us the outcome that we want. But community building and relationships with humans generally don't really work like that, right? Like it's messy, and it starts and it stops, and it's conflict, and it's funny, and it's weird, and you're like, how did we get here? But if you have enough of those that build upon one another, suddenly there's all these avenues that exist for not just conversation, but shared life experience, right? And that will kind of, community begets community, right? And individualization kind of begets individualization. And so it's kind of like, man, curiosity just allows us to try to perpetuate that in a different way.
And I'm thinking too of, with the power of curiosity, if I ask a question that allows you the opportunity to formulate that answer, but if I'm just telling you something, I'm not giving you the space to develop and grow in your own thinking, in your own abilities, your own gifts, whatever. And I was thinking of, I think it was Fred Craddock who was talking about preaching and sometimes the importance of asking a question or telling a story that people are thinking about as they go on from that space. And I thought that was just such a neat image. And what we see in Jesus too, when he tells a parable, oftentimes he'll tell a parable and he won't clear it up until people come to him and they're asking questions, which really puts learning in their lap and is inviting them into the process. Totally.
In the same way, right? Like he asks a lot of questions, and it seems like Jesus assumes the answer. So, and that's the aspect of curiosity that has to get played out too. Is if I ask you a question in curiosity, if I'm assuming the answer, I'm not going to be listening to you. I'm just going to be thinking of the next steps. But I could ask you a question like, Matt, the weather's going to be amazing in Sioux Falls this weekend, and I'm wondering what you're looking forward to the most. I could assume all the things that you're going to say because I'm also anticipating it, right? But curiosity, if I just kind of follow curiosity, I would just go, I wonder what Matt does on a sunny, beautiful day in the early spring in Sioux Falls. And then I would just sit, right? And I'm just kind of like, I'm the audience now. Like, what's going to come out?
Yeah, because one approach is fishing for an answer. Another is actually listening.
Right.
I wonder too, just some of our assumptions in helping us listen is, specifically in pastoral ministry or as Christians, the assumption that God is present by his Spirit and at work before I show up. I don't have to manipulate or control the conversation to try to get what I want out of it. But if I actually believe that the Holy Spirit is present and moving and that God is active in this world, then I need to pay attention to other people's stories and hear like, oh, it sounds like God's doing something there. And so the assumption is if God is doing something, then I need to listen and then join in, versus if God's not doing anything, I just need to make what I think needs to happen.
For sure. And I can't remember the exact theologian that said this, but I always have, even when you said that, I was thinking about this quote where A.W. Tozer quotes this in his book, The Pursuit of God. And he says, God is that which goes before, right? And like if that inhabits our imagination as we engage with one another and with curiosity, then yeah, what is God doing there that because he exists as the triune community, it's almost kind of, it's sitting there and the person has done all they can with it until someone else comes along, because it's a communal, it's a communal thing, right?
Right.
And so curiosity allows us to discover things about other people, and I think probably about ourselves too, that we wouldn't otherwise discover.
Yeah, I love that image. And I think of a professor in seminary who he would bring out a geode rock where it looks like a rock on the surface. And then he would turn it and you would see this beautiful thing happening under the surface. And he used that as an image to talk about what might God already be doing and inviting us to come and partner with him. And I just like the image a lot, because then it involves like, oh, I guess I should pay attention to other people, and I should pay attention to the stories of communities. And as I lean into that, I can start to discover rather than having to force whatever I think needs to be done. Instead, I come and I partner with what God is already doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what's funny about it too is I think what maybe makes people apprehensive about it is that if you are going to be truly curious, you can't structure that, right? You can't, there's nothing to build, right? It's just going to come out messy, and we're going to end up talking about how they played at their grandma's house when they're 8 years old, because that's what they wanted to talk about, right? Or how they met their wife, right? Which is fantastic, or all kinds of things, right? But once I finish that interaction, it's not a building block, right? It's a person's story. Like it's there's something sacred about it, and it's like a thread. And the more interactions we have, the more threads that I can learn. And then suddenly, there's this whole picture here. But at the same time, that person, even if I'm just listening, is pulling threads out of me too. Right. And so, which is actually, I think, one of the most surprising things about curiosity is it will oftentimes teach you about yourself, even though you may not have said anything, which is interesting, right?
Right. Yes. I think the image too of those threads being pulled out of both people, both the one who's listening and the one who's talking.
Yeah.
And then it seems like those threads then start to be woven together.
Yeah.
And there's a high level of value that we place on productivity, which I think leads us to bypass a lot of those important conversations where we are tied together.
Totally.
But there's something about just a conversation where you're not even aware of like, what is this doing? And it does something. It ties our lives together. God uses it to bring about new things, but we don't know how that's happening in that moment.
Absolutely.
When you think about other aspects that are important to community, is there anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah. So the one that I've been thinking about recently, and this is, I've come to it from various places, but the one I've been thinking about lately is patience, because I think that part of the culture that we live in, the pace at which we live is so frantic. But the only way you can really build community that lasts, the community building that we see happen when Jesus picks these disciples and just does life with them, right? It takes time. And we live in a culture that is all about efficiency, right? And you said productivity, right? And there's nothing efficient or like productive in some kind of Machiavellian sense about having curious conversations and leaning into community. Yeah. So I think a big aspect of it is patience, right? If I feel like I need community, the worst thing I can tell myself is I'm going to give myself 2 weeks, right? Yes. So I'm just thinking like the 2 week notice in between the end of jobs or whatever. And like people get paid every 2 weeks, right? Like we have these kind of 2 week things in our life. And the truth is that I cannot build community in 2 weeks, that I might be somewhere in 2 years. Yeah. Right. And I hopefully am somewhere really deep in 2 decades. But I need to think in bigger chunks of time and go, what would it be like if I just engage curious conversations and I worship with God's people and I share the table, not for a short amount of time, but for a long amount of time, right? And if I can embrace patience like the early church did. So I don't know if you've read this book. It's called The Patient Ferment of the Early Church by Alan Kreider. And so this is one of these books that I kept seeing footnoted in these other books I was reading, and I was like, I got to read this book. And what a phenomenal book. But, Kreider points out that the kind of primary value of the early church, the virtue that they talk about, is patience.
Yes.
And I just thought, how curious, because like if there's a virtue that we hate, it would be that one.
Right.
Like we despise it, right?
Yeah.
Like it goes against everything in our being, but it is literally the virtue that Kreider says built the community of the early church and the virtue that God used to build the church through the world in the first 3 centuries of church history. So what an incredible, thing that we can kind of look back to in our past and go, man, what if it's just that, right? What if there's no magic bullets and easy answers? What if it's just a patient persistence toward another as we chase Jesus together?
That's so good. I want to talk about that even more, but I'm like, I think that is such a powerful spot for us to reflect on as we go forward from this conversation, because patience, we assume, is a virtue for people who just have to be patient and have no other choice. But what if patience is a power that God has revealed to us through Christ, and that we should really lean into that? And if we don't have that, we're losing out on something powerful that God has given us.
Absolutely. It's kind of one of those things where there must be certain lessons that we'll only learn in community, and there must be certain aspects of discipleship that we will only discover in patience.
Well, Brandon, I appreciate so much your insights on patience, on community, on curiosity. I think this whole conversation is so valuable. So we appreciate you being a part of the podcast.
Yeah, well, thanks so much again for the invitation to the conversation. And I'll just look forward to how the podcast continues to move along.